Hello and welcome to the Graphic 485 YouTube channel. My name is Lynn, or LV Handcrafted here on YouTube, and today this is the card that I'll be making. It's called a 3D window card, and it's wonderful because it's double-sided. You can decorate both sides. Look at how it pops out to have all of that dimension. This card displays beautifully, and it's a lot easier to make than I would have thought. So let's make this. Okay, so to get started, here's a look at everything that I'll be using today. So I've got the Make a Splash paper collection in the 8x8 paper pad, the coordinating ink pads to go with this collection. I've cut all of my pieces and the dimensions are on screen now. Feel free to take a screenshot if you'd like. In white, 80-pound cover weight cardstock, I have 4 pieces that are 4 1/4 wide by 5 1/2 tall. I've scored those at 2 1/8 along the 4 1/4 inch edge. I have 2 pieces that measure 4 1/2 wide by 4 3/4 tall, scored at 1/2 inch and 4 inches along that 4 1/2 inch edge. Those are from the Patterns and Solids. I have 8 pieces that measure 2 inches wide by 5 1/4 high, and you can mix and match your pattern papers. And not shown are 2 pieces that measure 2 3/4 inch wide by 3/4 of an inch tall, and those are scored at 1/2 inch, 1 1/4, 1 1/2, and 2 1/4. Besides that, you'll want some ephemera or cut aparts from the paper collection, or you can even stamp and color your focal points and your sentiments, whatever you'd like. So I do have everything cut, but I haven't scored anything yet. So I'll set aside all of the pieces and focus on these 4 white pieces, which will create the card base. If the dimensions sound familiar to you, it's because these will fold down, or this card will fold down to USA2 in size. So that measures 4 1/4 wide by 5 1/2 tall. And along that 4 1/4 inch edge, we're just going to score this in half at 2 1/8, and we'll do that on all 4 of these panels. You don't need super heavyweight cardstock here because these all get attached to each other and layered up. So by the time you're done, it will feel very substantial. These are the pieces that measured 4 1/2 by 4 3/4, and along the 4 1/2 inch edge, I've scored it at 1/2 inch and 4 inches. Or you can just score at 1/2 inch on both sides, however you'd like to do that. And those pieces did come from the 12x12 Patterns and Solids. On these panels here, that 1/2 inch that we scored on both sides, those are glue tabs. So I am mitering those corners just to take a little triangle of cardstock off, and that way when those glue tabs fold back, if it's not completely straight, it's not going to be visible because that little bit of cardstock has been removed, and so that just makes for a neater finish in the end. With our 4 white pieces, I will fold that and burnish it really well and make sure that all of that is nice and straight. So I am lining up the edge of the panel as I fold it in half. And so with all of those pieces scored and folded and burnished, I can start decorating these. I want to attach my pattern paper to the valley side of these white panels. And I cut my 8 pieces of pattern paper from 3 different patterns. You could do whatever you'd like. If you want, you can make all 8 of them the same. You can do 2 sets of 4. You can do 4 sets of 2. I did in one pattern, I did 2. In a second pattern paper, I cut 2 pieces, and from a third pattern paper, I cut 4 pieces. So you can really decorate this however you'd like. What I'm doing as I'm adhering these panels is I am putting the pattern paper right up to that score line, but I'm being careful not to cross over the score line because I want this to be able to fold flat. And if you overlap that score line, it's going to create some bulk and it's going to require the card to fold through an extra layer of paper. So you want to steer clear from attaching your pattern paper over your score line. And because of that, it may mean that your border is going to be uneven. And so to account for that, I'm just taking just little slivers of pattern paper off of the edge. That way I can try to get the three edges surrounding the pattern paper to be as equal as I can. That's totally an optional step. You don't have to do that if you don't want, but I wanted to try to get all of those borders nice and even. So by just trimming just that little fly's eyelash off, it helps to neaten everything up in the end. But later, I'm going to end up inking the edges of everything, and I think that also covers up any unevenness. So this might have been totally unnecessary, to be honest. The other thing that might be something to keep in mind is if you're using a pattern paper, especially like this mermaid one, where there's a scene essentially, do take note of the order that you've cut these pieces in so that it has a nice seamless, the pattern is nice and seamless, and it continues from the left panel to the right panel. So that might be something that you want to take note of as you're adhering your pieces, because if the two patterns don't line up, it is probably going to be more noticeable on a pattern like that one as compared to a pattern that may be just a small repeat pattern, for example. So that might be something that you want to pay close attention to. And as I mentioned, I want to ink up the edges of the card base because my card bases are very bright white, and this pattern paper, there really isn't much white in it at all. So the whiteness of my card base really, I feel like it stands out in a way that isn't that pleasing to my eyes. And that's all subjective. So just depending on what you like aesthetically, you can either skip this step or you can also just cut your mats and layers differently too. So that's totally your choice. And as well, if you wanted to avoid this, you could also cut, instead of using 4 white pieces of cardstock, you could create your card base from the patterns and solids also. I just didn't want to waste my patterns and solids. So that's why I went with a white base, and I'm just going to ink the edges to take off the white. So there's lots of different things that you can do there, but this would look very lovely with the patterns and solids as your base as well. So that might be something to consider. But as I mentioned, I like to kind of stretch my supplies, and so where I can use some solid color cardstock, I will usually opt for that. And with these blue panels, I'm inking up in Marine Blue, which is a Graphic 45 hybrid ink. And I am inking not just around all 4 edges, but I'm inking through the center as well. Because remember, there's that score line that we were being careful not to cross over with our pattern papers. So I want to take the white away from the score line too. However, the Marine Blue is a very I wouldn't say super bright, but it's brighter than the pattern paper. So I wanted to mute that color a little bit and just knock it down a little bit in brightness. And that's why I decided to add a layer of natural linen over top. And that had the effect of kind of aging the edges a little bit. So it had that nice kind of vignette feel to it. and it took away some of the brightness, which was my hope. So that worked out really well. And I think it just helped the colors actually match the colors of the pattern paper just a little bit better. And I was actually originally thinking that I should ink up my white cardstock before I glued down the pattern paper, but I completely forgot. And that ended up being a nice happy accident because I think by inking it up afterwards and getting some of that ink onto the pattern paper, it does actually help to bring everything together. And I think it actually makes it feel like it matches better than it would have if I were to have inked up those white pieces of cardstock before attaching the pattern paper on top of it. So I think that ended up working out pretty well. And now that I have all of my panels inked up and ready to go, I can actually start to put the card together. So putting the card together is actually pretty easy. So these four pieces that make up the base of the card, you do kind of want to decide which how you want the order of this to be. So there's going to be a front, a back, and then two side pieces, and together they'll form this X. And in my case, I want the monochromatic papers to be the front and back because I'm going to be using some of the ephemera, and I don't want a lot of color behind those ephemera pieces. That way the ephemera sticks out and is nice and visible. And I want the pattern paper that has the mermaids on the sides, and because those are nice scenes, nothing's going to go over top of the sides, so you can really see it and appreciate it. Now I've taken one of my 4 panels, I have adhesive on all 4 edges and along both sides of the score line. And when I go to attach this first piece, I'm going to really take my time to get this piece in correctly. And in fact, I was thinking about it and I wanted to also, besides just using the dry adhesive, I want to use a little bit of liquid adhesive as well. Because that way, if my card panels make a little bit of accidental contact, the liquid adhesive is going to give me a little bit of time to still lift that and move it around. Now, as you are putting your panels together, if you are working with directional papers, you want to take note and make sure that everything is facing the same direction. And when I work on getting this first panel in, I would recommend taking your time to get this one in, because if this one is all lined up correctly, the rest goes super fast. And how I like to assemble this card is I like to make sure that the center where the folds are of these 2 panels, I like to make sure that they are nice and flush, perfectly lined up with each other. And that way, if it happens to be off, at least it'll be off on the outer edges, and you can always trim the outer edges. If you line this up from the outer edge of the card and adhere it, if it ends up being off in the center, it's going to be really hard to actually cut through that because you're cutting through the middle fold. So that's why I find it easier to actually line up that middle fold of these 2 first panels and let the rest of the panel go where it needs to go. And you do only want to adhere half of this panel. I did put adhesive on both sides of my first panel, but with this second panel, I only want to glue down half of it. And now I'll put some liquid adhesive on the other half. And for my third piece, as I get the third piece in, again, I'm just doing a double check to make sure everything is the correct orientation. And again, I'm going to line it up with the fold. So I'm taking the fold and just pushing it right up against that second panel that I attached. And that's why if you got that first one in perfectly lined up, this one's super easy because you just need to fold that third panel and then butt it up right against the second panel. And it's going to line up perfectly. And as I mentioned, if you do need to trim a little bit, it's totally fine because the outside edges are easy to trim. And I'm actually going to do that here because my white cardstock, and you might find this to be the case just depending on the brand cardstock that you buy, it's not exactly 8.5 by 11. It actually measures 8.5 by a smidge more than 11. So sometimes when I'm cutting card bases, I along that 11-inch edge, I should get two lengths that are 5.5 each. But sometimes I'll get one that's 5.5 and one that's a little bit more than 5.5. So I think that's why I needed to do a little bit of trimming on that one bottom edge. And I think I was a little bit crooked on one of the side edges. And so I just trimmed that, and that helps to straighten and neaten everything up. Now for our fourth and last panel, again, I'm going to just apply adhesive, and it's really easy when your card base is white and everything else is a different color, because basically you only ever want to be putting adhesive on the back sides of all of these panels. And so I put adhesive along all four edges and then along both sides of that middle score line. And with my fourth piece, I'm gonna again fold that in half and just line up that middle fold with the middle of the other three panels that are glued together. And so that way the centers all meet up perfectly. And as I mentioned, if you need to do any trimming, you can easily trim those outer edges to square everything up or neaten up your edges a little bit. So once that's in place, just fold everything flat and give it a really good burnish. So this is essentially an X card. That's one of the names that I know this by. So that by itself is a fun card design. But to take it up a level, you can add that sort of aperture frame that turns it into a 3D window. Now, this piece I did originally cut to 4.5 by 5 inches tall, but then I decided I want to actually shorten this a little bit. So the measurement that I gave you at the beginning is the correct measurement. I was doing a little bit of redesigning on the fly here. So the final dimensions for this do end up being 4.5 wide by 4.75 inch tall. And along the 4.5-inch edge, you still want to score it at 0.5 inch on both sides. And so that will be, if you want the look that I'm going for on this card, where there's an equal border showing all the way around that panel, then those are the measurements that you'll want to use. But again, once you've seen this, you can take some liberties and redesign it to whatever aesthetic that you'd like. And in particular, one of the fun things to play with on this card is the size and the shape of the aperture that you cut into this piece, that these two pieces, I should say. And one of the things that might guide your decision in terms of the size or the shape aperture might be what you want to showcase through the aperture or through the window. So if you have something particular in mind, then maybe there's a nice shape that goes along with it that would highlight it really well. So that's one thing that you might want to consider. Also, you don't want to cut too big of a window out of this panel, because it will kind of sort of weaken the structure a little bit if the frame is a little bit too thin. So that might be another consideration as well. So definitely up to you what you end up going with, and that could really change the look of this card just depending on, again, that's the size and shape of the aperture. And you could, once you've done this one time, you could definitely kind of add a lot more to it, because the other thing that especially on this particular card, I do have room if I wanted to actually create a frame around the aperture. I could definitely do that because there's enough paper all the way around this circle to add kind of a matte layer around it. So I think that would be a fun option too. But I didn't think about that until until this moment now. So maybe that's something that I do the next time I make this card. I'm really in love with this card design, so I've already made it a couple times already, and it's really easy to whip out more of these because it looks complicated, but it goes really quickly, especially after you've done it the one time. And just to get these two sides to look the same, even though, to be honest, if it's different, no one would ever notice because you'll never see these two frames next to each other. So it doesn't really matter if they aren't perfectly in line with each other, but I wanted to get them to match as best I can. And the best way I know how to do that is to just line up the two panels, take the same die that I cut the window from the one, tape it down, and then run all of this through my die cutting machine. And it should still cut through that layer of blue cardstock. And that way you're cutting the exact same aperture with the exact same placement through the second panel. And so again, that's not super critical that they are exactly the same, but it is nice for them to match. And so I did also, as I was cutting this circle, I did push it a little bit more towards the top, thinking that that would give me some room for adding something to the bottom, like a sentiment. I hadn't quite thought through everything that I wanted to put onto this card, but it's nice once you get the structure made. You can then just really focus on decorating. So initially I was going to use these cut aparts. So I picked out two cut aparts that had sentiments on them, which I think is kind of nice because then, you can have a sentiment on one side, and then if you wanted to have more of your focal image on the other. The other thing that you could do is if you wanted to put your focal image on one side and then use the back for where you write your message, that would be another option too, because then that way, this is the kind of card that I think is just asking to be put on display. So if you want to just decorate the one side with a focal image and sentiment, maybe that's the side that gets put out on display so that it can be visible. But on the back is where you might have your handwritten message. So there's a lot of different options for how you end up wanting to decorate the front and the back. Now with these pieces, to attach them, you just want to put adhesive on those 1/2-inch glue tabs. That's all we want to be attached to the card base, because this is that piece that sort of bows out and has that natural curve to create that window. And so nothing else needs to be glued down, just these 1/2-inch glue tabs. And you want to do that on both panels. And again, I'm going to use a combination of dry adhesive. I like to get my dry adhesive all the way to that folded edge or the outer edge. That way there's less risk of lifting from the outer edge. But when I go to attach this, I'll also use a bit of liquid adhesive because that will that'll give me a little bit of time, a little bit of wiggle room just in case I need it as I'm trying to line it up. Now, it's at this point that I realized I needed those two extra little pieces that at the beginning of this video I said weren't shown. Well, I'm going to be able to cut those just right out of the leftovers from the cuts that I made for my panels. And I'm using the exact same pattern paper. That way, if any of this ends up being visible, it's going to kind of fade into the background. So this is the piece that measures 2 3/4 wide by 3/4 tall, and you want to score it at 1/2 inch, 1 1/4, 1 1/2, and 2 1/4. And what that gives you is 2 1/2-inch glue tabs on both ends. And in the center, there's going to be a 1/4 inch that is what we will attach our focal image to in order to pop it up and have it sort of lift off from the base of the card. So with those pieces ready, then I can attach my frame here. So I'm just going to start on the one side, get that lined up and glued down. And then I'll peel off the adhesive from the other side and get that glued down by just folding it down flat. So everything should fold really flat. It's just going to be really thick because we have so many layers. So that's why this card, it's going to definitely weigh over an ounce, I think. And that's going to be enough to make it trigger extra postage, at least here in the States. So once we have those in, then we can attach these little pop-up mechanisms. And again, the 2 1/2-inch glue tabs, that's the only place you need to put adhesive. And you just want to center that in the middle of your aperture. So now that's our entire card base complete. And now comes the fun part of just decorating. So I pulled out my 2 original panels, and then I thought maybe there's something more we can do. Because what looked a little bit funny to me is I chose a circle aperture, but my cut apart pieces were rectangular. So I thought that was a little bit weird. And so instead I pulled out the ephemera pack from this collection. And I think I'm going to just collage up little scenes essentially and put that in the middle of this window instead. So again, I was attracted to this piece here that looks like a little postage stamp, and it's rectangular as well. But at least I have other little elements because this piece is small enough to where I can fit additional other elements, die cut elements around the border to make that edge a little bit more rounded, a little bit more organic, so that it sort of fills out that window, that circular window, a little bit better. Now, when you go to glue this to that pop-up mechanism, only put glue in that 1/4 inch middle section. And that's going to be what allows this to pop up from the back of the card base and give you all of that wonderful dimension. Now flipping over to the other side, I've got this really nice large banner, and that one reads Born to be a Mermaid. And so this particular card is going to a crafty friend of mine who is celebrating a birthday this month, and she just loves mermaids. So for May, the entire month of May, she made a mermaid card a day, and it was phenomenal. So this card is going to make its way to her. And I wanted to get a mermaid on here as a focal image. And so I decided to fussy cut one out from one of the paper pads, or one of the pattern papers, I should say. And so once I've got that element cut out, then I decided to maybe collage up a little bit behind it to kind of fill it out a little bit. I'm trying to cover that entire pop-up mechanism, but to be honest, it's not super critical to cover that up, especially since I did cut it from the same pattern paper as the panels behind it. So it is a little bit camouflaged anyways, but I was still striving to cover the entire pop-up mechanism because I feel like that does make it look a little bit more maybe like a little bit more mysterious as to how it is kind of just suspended in mid-air seemingly. So again, you only want to put adhesive in that 1/4 inch section, and always open up your card to make sure that adhesive, because especially if you're using a liquid adhesive like me and it oozes beyond where it should, by just opening your card and making sure that the things that need to be popped up are popping up, that will help you catch any accidental, glue seepage while there's still time to lift it. And so the last things as finishing touches that I'll do is attach some sentiments. And again, I'm only putting adhesive like right in the center because that's going to allow the two edges to lift up and extend as that curved window opens up. So everything folds down flat beautifully, lots of space to decorate with, and I love that you can build up little scenes and kind of frame them in this window. And you get the entire front and you get the entire back to decorate. And it's just really lovely, the sentiments here. I think they work really well for a birthday card. But look how everything just comes to life when you pop that open and you put it on display. So that is my finished card today. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks so much, and until next time, happy crafting and have a fabulous day. Bye!